I think I put the wrong slide. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Christopher Meyer, California Energy Commission. I'm the manager of the Building Standards Office, which includes the group that develops the Title 24 Part 6. Also, we have a group that develops the BayREN software that supports it. Also, we work with local jurisdictions on REACH codes, the Title 24 Part 11, and sort of try to encourage those very important incubator systems, because as a lot of you may be aware, excuse me, the Part 11, the REACH codes that are adopted by local groups and agencies, those help us prove sort of what are the aspirational goals for our codes for the entire state. What works, what doesn't, and that information we get from those programs helps us figure out where we can step in the next code cycle. So those are something that partnership is very important to us. We just want to be there to help encourage you. And a little bit later on the slide, I'll talk about our schedule, because we're going to have a workshop coming up on April 20th, where one of the things we're going to talk about is this presentation I'm giving here, but also about model solar ordinances for local jurisdictions and how we're trying to help with that process. So basically, it's like the ICO vision of ZNE was more based a little bit more mathematically and sort of averaged over the year. So we discovered that what was sort of an accounting and mathematical possibility was a little bit more challenging when we tried to put it into code to figure out sort of the coincidence between load and generation. So basically, lessons learned, and my apologies, this is usually about an hour presentation, so I'll just switch down just a tad. When we get more renewables onto the grid, we have to look at sort of when they're available and sort of what increases in PV on a house, what is going to be offsetting. Is it going to be offsetting renewables? Is it going to be offsetting higher GHG power production? So understanding that gives us an idea of what we want to encourage and what the actual benefits are, so that we're not, as I say, looking at a mathematical benefit that doesn't actually have a practical benefit. And so we started talking more about this idea of grid harmonization, as the table in the back talked about. It's one of the things that is my background, working on a lot of power transmission and distribution issues. We're very cognizant of the fact that it's great to have aspirations about balancing the system, but you have to understand what is available and can you move the power. We have a lot of work with the PUC trying to understand the ability of the distribution infrastructure to keep up with our goals towards ZNE. So, as I said, lesson learned. If you saw Moz give this presentation where he repeated over and over again, the grid is not storage. The grid does not have the ability to store energy, and that was a misconception some people had, that the idea if you over-generate from a behind-the-meter PV system, that the energy would go out there and it would be available to you later in the day. If there's not a use for that over-generation, and the systems have to start trying to get it back up to full power, it can create some problems, and you could actually end up, in worst case scenario, curtailing other renewable facilities. Or, worst case, you end up socializing the costs of that. If under NEM rules, you're not paying for any upgrades necessary for your system, and the utilities have to upgrade by adding battery storage on a local level, that cost is socialized with all ratepayers, including people at the lower levels of the socioeconomic ladder that are going to be most impacted by this. So we're trying to avoid codes that would sort of disproportionately socialize those costs. So, we realized that electrification of the homes, it results in a larger PV system, but if we can work on self-utilization strategies, you can minimize those grid impacts. And that's really what we're looking at in demand response, grid harmonization that doesn't create a problem with those larger systems. Because if you can imagine, you have a system, if you're generating, excuse me, 8,000, 10,000 kilowatt hours over the year, but when your system's generating that, you're at work. Your electric car is plugged in at work, not at your house. You're taking most of that energy and you're putting it on the grid. You come home at night, and then you plug your car in, you have all of your uses. If you're not thinking about that grid harmonization and those demand response, you're basically taking all your power back from the grid, and you may not be getting as green resources as you're producing. So that's why we're talking about mathematical versus practical. So, and we're still finding that storage is not really cost effective, but we are looking at methods of combining PV and storage in subtle ways with sort of smart controls that could bridge this gap. So, as I said, the grid harmonization is very important. You know, one of my engineers added that little thing because it's sort of, we're getting people to finally realize that, you know, PVs can be beneficial, and now we're starting to throw a lot more at them, and some people are having trouble with that. So, but you'll hear over and over this idea of grid harmonization, which is not triggering the need for significant increase infrastructure investments by the utilities that are going to get socialized. Also, we want to make sure that we don't run into a point where someone comes up with a really good, you know, ZNE development, and they can't interconnect because the utility can't support the impact of them pushing energy both to the grid and then getting it back. So, and these are some of the strategies. You'll recognize the heat pump water heaters. Sean and I were just having a great chat about, you know, the value of these things to store energy thermally. Having a larger tank, you know, the idea of, you know, having manufacturers build larger tanks that are taller rather than fatter so that you can do a retrofit. One of the problems if you have a heat pump water heater that is sized to fit where your old gas came out of, it's going to be generally too small to meet that load, and you're running into electric resistance a lot of the time, and your electricity bill will go up instead of down. So that's the kind of thing we're trying to, you know, work with industry to say, can they meet some of these challenges when they're building these machines, rather than putting it onto the homeowner to try to sort these out. Another thing is we talk about the battery, but also the idea of these smart controls for the house to really give feedback to the consumer so they understand where their uses are. But it also just really ties into the demand response. If you are working with your utility to say what are their problems, if voltage support is a huge problem when they have a lot of renewables, if they have access to behind-the-meter battery storage for voltage support. And this is sort of looking at the future on sort of the phase, sort of the smarter, I guess it would be inverters. So, you know, we have basically your, you know, your pick 1, 2, 3, and PUC should have the best of the smart inverters by the time our code goes into in 2020. And those will have a lot of benefits that we're seeing in our models to the grid for grid stabilization, grid harmonization. So we're very excited about that. And I think everyone in this room understands the duck curve. I think, you know, that's really what we're worried about, is that whole idea of not following some of the mistakes that other states have had, where their answer to the duck curve was to basically gut NEM programs. We're trying to avoid, you know, creating a situation where that's people's knee-jerk reaction. One of the things that is a limitation to the Energy Commission is really our statute basically say we have to do a life cycle cost analysis so that it's not, you know, societal benefits, it's actually to that home builder. Sorry, the homeowner. Is that homeowner going to get benefit from the things we're requiring in code that are going to offset the initial costs? So if we say you have to put a feature in that costs you $3,000 in the life cycle of that house, are you going to get that back in energy savings? And we have 16 different climate zones, so some features don't make it into all climate zones. It just depends on, what works well. As this group is mainly representing a more mild climate zone, there are things that are not cost effective here because you may not have the heating and cooling load that we have in the Central Valley or in Palm Springs, that the technology there, like high performance attics, high performance walls, they might be cost effective where they're not as cost effective here because, granted, we're in a much milder climate zone here and don't have to deal with those energy uses. Here, it's just trying to encourage people not to have a 200-inch TV set. I'm going to jump around. My apologies here. We gave this to a different audience. I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with EDR, and this is sort of one of the focuses of what we're doing. So energy design rating is sort of what we've decided is going to be a really good way for us to focus our standards that is going to assist locals in developing breach codes in the easiest manner possible. And I'm just going to sort of jump back here where there it is. For those familiar with the ResNet, it's based on the IECC 2006 standard home. Existing homes you'll find around California tend to be sort of in this 150, 130 range in this efficiency score. The better you do, the lower you're going to go. So the reference house is at 100. Houses in sort of the 2016 standard, 2013 standard are around 60 to 70. So that gives you an idea of sort of where we are right now. And our idea is if you get down to 0, you're at a ZNE house. So that's sort of the idea of what this EDR metric we're using is. And so basically what we're talking about is by using that metric, we're going to use it as sort of a duplex system where we're going to give you one score that has to be met by efficiency only. So this is what we're proposing for 2019. And that's sacrosanct. It can't be traded off. So you can't throw a big PV system on to take out efficient windows or good insulation. We want to get the good envelope that gives you 24/7 benefit, and ultimately, no matter what you do for renewables, you're going to have less load. And then the second part would be adding a right-sized PV system, which in our mind, to align with net energy metering rules, would be enough energy to offset your electrical load. So in a mixed fuel house, it's just focusing on your electrical consumption. And on an all-electric house, it would be the entire load. So what we did realize is that if we, in our base standards, set for an electric house, said, okay, your base required PV system is for your entire load, it doesn't give you a lot of room to wiggle some credits and stuff. So we're going to set the same size requirement that would be for a mixed fuel phone, but then you're going to basically be adding more and get credit for it. So it's just, we're basically looking at ways where we don't disincentivize all electric housing. And we also recognize where we need to sort of send messages for not looking at it just as a mathematical problem where you're assuming that the cost effectiveness is just if you push it all out to the grid and get net compensation, because as a lot of you are aware, we look at 30 years of what the life cycle cost of the house is over 30 years. We don't know what's going to be going on with NAM compensation in 30 years. We don't even know what's going to happen in 2019 when the PUC reassesses NAM for 2.0 and then 3. So we're looking at it sort of more conservatively when it comes to compensation. And of course, we don't put federal credits in there. So, so this is just talking about sort of what we're doing for our 2019. Is sort of we're ratcheting down the standards as far as in the severe climate zones requiring better insulation. The idea, if you guys are aware of high performance attics and high performance walls, if you imagine not letting the heat get into your attic where your ducting system and your stuff and your HVAC systems are, that hugely increases the efficiency of those systems. So you're not trying to operate a cooling system in a 140, 150 degree environment. It also has all sorts of other benefits as far as if you put the insulation up on the roof deck, either above the deck or just below, it doesn't tend to get disturbed as much or degraded as much by other trades coming in doing, plumbing, electrical. We even have some builders that have decided to go all the way to a sealed attic because they realize they could save about $3,000 a house by getting rid of all of the venting systems, but also all the labor that was to cut around those systems with your roofing, your flashings, insulation, everything. So they started realizing when we said, okay, look at this, they started saying, well, we can actually do this in a manner that saves the builder money and produces a much better house for the homeowner. Also, little benefits of you actually having that, you can store things in that's not a hostile environment. So, and this gets back in sort of the bottom part talking about this idea that we talked about as far as the EDR being efficiency first, which is what we really focus on, getting as efficient a building as possible, and then adding renewable generation, because then you add a smaller renewable system, which is going to be more cost effective to the consumer and minimizes the unanticipated consequences to the grid. So, and as I talked about briefly, it's like this idea of setting just a numerical target. It gives the locals a chance of saying, instead of having to come up with a very complicated suite of different measures for reach codes, you could very simply just say, in our climate zone, the building standards requires an energy design rating of 20. We're going to say, we want you to get to 15 or 10. And that leaves the entire suite of efficiency options open to that home builder to get to that target, where if you went on to just one technology or a couple technologies, a lot of those might not be available to every home builder, and you'd end up with possibly a lot of exemptions. So instead of going a method that pushes people towards exemptions, if you just do just a numerical, you might get more realized energy efficiency. So, and once again, it's like one of our goals in this is to avoid oversized systems that are going to cause problems to the grid, and also we're looking at demand response as one of those things that will give you credit numerically, where if you have systems where we create systems with utilities where they may be able to control your behind-the-meter battery or other high energy loads to minimize those uses during the high grid use times, they might not have to upgrade their distribution system. If they can get all of the energy needs to your house, but they can control when they deliver that energy, it can have huge benefits and reduce those sort of socialized costs that we were talking about. So this is, for those of you who are familiar with CBAC, this is just sort of a simple write-up of sort of what one of these houses would look like in climate zone 12, which is the Sacramento area. You see the EDR, sort of have to stay back here. The standard design of this building, in the code would be 47.3, you see it up there at the top. The building as designed by this modeler got down to 43, so they actually beat that target, so that's great. And then because they beat that target, this size of the PV system is now a little smaller than it would have been if they just met it. So then you get your 20 points of your EDR, 20.8, to get you to this final target score that was probably around 23 for this climate zone, and they beat that. So that gives you sort of a very high level. But one thing you will notice when you look down the proposed design, if you go over, so that would be the fourth column in, is that what you see getting to be the dominant thing, where it used to be up at the top, it used to be your 176 and 355, because you have an efficient building, your heating and cooling loads are actually fairly small. You look down at your plug loads, they're huge. And that can be all of your set-top boxes that run continuously, every little charger you plug in that's actually left plugged in and not turned off with a power strip. Those are taking energy. You know, smart refrigerators and smart appliances, you realize that they take energy just like a network system. Anything that's connected to your network, they're always on, and they're always pinging, they're always drawing energy. So we're working, actually the appliance office at the Energy Commission is sort of working, trying to, how can we cut those down? You know, really the next big step is not really what I'm doing in energy efficiency, it's how do we reduce the plug loads? And that's really going to be an education to the public of recognizing where the uses of their house are and how to reduce those. So, okay, this is something where when we looked at sort of worst case scenario, if it's not done smartly, taking an all-electric house in the different climate zones you see here, it shows you in the different climate zones what the summer cooling kilowatt hours are and then what the winter heating. And this is predominantly because if you don't think about this correctly, do things like you know, put heat pump water heaters that are set in efficiency mode, not comfort mode. You really have strategies to reduce and going into electric resistance. An all-electric house can end up using a lot more energy in the winter, and generally will, than in the summer. Unfortunately, California, we've invested a lot of our time and effort and money into developing renewable systems that are really summer-based. They're designed to meet that summer cooling peak. If we shift over to a winter peak, we could have problems. This is sort of just as a sort of way out there. We don't have to worry about this right now because if we made every house in the next 10 years electric, it's just going to be, less than 1 million houses compared to 7 million that are already mixed fuel. So it's not an Armageddon situation. It's something we just need to understand to make sure we just look at this thing of how we mitigate that potential impact on the grid and make sure that we're not counting on a renewable resource that is not potentially going to be there in the winter or not going to be as strong in the winter. So in this graphic, it just shows the cars, the different loads in your house. And as I say, it's like if you don't have storage, things of that nature, plugging your electric car in at night, you're more likely to be getting energy from the grid rather than renewable energy that you generated on site. So, and this is sort of one of my slightly sarcastic engineers came up with this idea of summer duck versus Christmas turkey, but this gives you sort of an idea. If you look at the blue one at the bottom is a mixed fuel house, and you sort of see that even a mixed fuel house, their PV system is smaller, but even there's a difference between their load and their generation in the winter. But when you take that to an all-electric house, because of the different technologies and the different uses in a lot of climate zones where they tend to be delivering a lot of energy and gas in the winter, in an all-electric house, you're trying to meet all those heating needs with electricity. You end up with a fairly large gap between your generation and your load that needs to be made up in another way with power from the grid, which we have to make sure that that power is actually low carbon power, that we're not inadvertently relying on high carbon. And this is, when we're talking about things, we're looking at all 16 climate zones. There will be milder climate zones where this is not as big an issue. So I'm going to do it this time, so I think I'm okay for
yeah, you've got him.
So these are sort of, by climate zone, the different sort of EDR scores that we're looking at. This is a mixed fuel hub, so I'll just go very quickly through this, and I have another one on. But you're looking at, EDR scores in the 20s for most areas, a little higher in some of the more extreme climate zones. But we started looking at adding, storage, or in some that you see the ones in the middle that are sort of the reddish color. It's the idea of putting a PV system that nets out all of your energy, including your gas, just with a very large PV system. The problem is it violates the NAM. You might, under Rule 21, you might not be able to connect it, which is not a good thing, and it has grid harmonization problems. It's also a very large system that might not fit on all roofs. Same thing with site going for a EDR of 0 with batteries and basic controls, which is basically just a dumb battery. It's still a large system, NEM problems, and potentially is not going to be good for grid harmonization. In 7, we started looking at, well, what if you worked with the utility and you let the utility control the batteries so that you mitigated some of those problems, and they could dispatch it when they needed. They could have some benefits from that. All of a sudden, we started realizing you could actually reduce the size of your battery with the smart controls. So you actually, your PV size, as you see here, is actually fairly realistic. So you end up with a 5.6 in climate zone 1. You went from an 8.1 down to a 5.6 kV system. So I mean, that's a reasonable size for that climate zone. And then when we said, okay, in 8, let's go really far out there and say you have those smart controls, but you go to a much higher efficiency water heater and furnace than we can require under our basic codes because of federal preemption. You can actually go even smaller. So you start getting closer to the ones if you're just doing electric only. So we're seeing some really cool ways of mixing batteries, smart controls, and PV systems. And we're not sure if we're going to hit that in 2019, but we're very, very excited about it. This is an all-electric house. So you see the systems are larger, and you run into sort of that same problem of if you just put a big PV system without any sort of smart controls, without thinking of grid harmonization, you could have some problems. But if you get to the point of adding some storage with that, smart storage, you can actually get a much smaller system, meet your electrical needs, not create grid problems, and get into that cost effective for the consumer. So, I can go through this a little bit more. We can talk about it during the breaks, but it's just, this is a very dynamic environment. So this slide has changed about 3 times in the last 2 weeks. So we keep learning more, and I have Mozzie and Bill over at the Energy Commission who are just brilliant at this stuff, and we have great conversations, and people like Sean and Pierre challenge us, and we also have the solar people and the people from CBIA that keep us on our toes. So all of those different ideas and opinions help make sure that we're not sort of looking too myopically at one solution and realizing what all the benefits for different groups are. So this is sort of a very sort of high level look at the things that we're trying to make sure that we address when we're looking at all electric houses. And for all electric houses right now, we're really in our 2019, we're focusing on taking away barriers, but we're not ready to put all electric buildings into the code because that is all 16 climate zones. There's all sorts of issues, but we realize that there might be climate zones, there might be certain customers, multifamily situations like that, that they make more sense. Where when we're looking at more single family right now, for our 2020, focusing on that, we still run into some problems. And as I say, the coincidence of load generation is a big one. Getting that sort of load shifting ability is a problem. The winter and summer we talked about, the lack of utility scale storage. Right now, there are some programs coming on, some projects coming on there to get utility storage. Some of those projects, some of the bigger ones, are actually just talking about using existing baseload power plants, which are gas-fired, to charge those batteries, to use them for voltage support, so when you get more PV or other things, you can balance that load, instead of local systems that are designed to take over generation from solar, keep it locally, and then distribute that back on the same day. We're hoping that that's going to be following. When I talk about the lack of utility scale seasonal energy storage, that's sort of the aspirational things such as being able to store energy, whether it's pump storage, methane storage, I mean all sorts of different things that people are talking about, where you can have overgeneration in the summer from renewables and save that and use that during the winter or later in the year when you have less renewables available. And as I said, it's like there's some concern with the utilities and the PUC on the state of the distribution system to handle some of the ideas of trying to deliver 100% of a house's need just with electricity. Infill, small areas, no problem. They're talking when we put it in code, if it became that you'd have groups of hundreds or thousands of houses at the end of circuits that would be delivering all their energy just with electricity. And the cost effectiveness behind the meter storage, we're working on that, so we're hopeful. This is just a really sort of high level, looking at sort of what the mix is of energy in, from just a renewable standpoint. We had some interesting things this last year, sort of a weird weather year, where wind didn't give us as much as we expected. Hydro, because of the drought, didn't give us as much. When you have droughts, it also can impact geothermal because it can impact water levels. So what we have to look at is sort of, sending messages out to the utilities, to the PUC, to look at where we need to go with our renewable grid, or our renewable power plant in the future to give us that coincidence of load and generation and that resiliency. So we have reliable renewables, so we're not inadvertently relying on peaking power plants such as natural gas, which aren't going to be as efficient as even the baseload plants. So, and this one we chatted about. So this is just sort of a energy commission tuning our own horn one from the energy use back in the 70s to what it is today per house. So that's really just a lot of that's just on efficiency. So if you can get the efficiency down, you make the ability to go all electric a lot easier. This one you guys will have this. I wanted to make this available so you guys can see. This is sort of what our schedule is, and we're starting to put our schedules up for workshops. So I beg all of you to participate in our process. Let us know if we're missing something, if we're going the wrong direction, or if you have ideas. I'm always one for telling my staff and stakeholders anecdotal information is really great for a barroom conversation, but I need data to influence code. So I need actually hard numbers that I can use to convince the decision makers that we need to move forward on a certain measure. So anything I can get from people that's actual data is very, very helpful. So, and just some informational resources, and I added some things that E3 in their initial report, which is going to be coming out soon, is just talking about sort of the different sizes necessary when you're looking at TDV versus just site energy. So, and also we're making assumptions as far as where the energy cost is going to go for PV panels. We're assuming that they're going to keep going down. But when we ran our cost effectiveness, we realized that even if the price of the PV panels doesn't go down, we're still going to be cost effective in those call it 5 zones by adding this requirement for PV in our 2019 code. So, and this is sort of just a couple, very high level for how these are being compensated under NEM rules. NEM 2.0, where it's going to be a little less for the surplus generation The middle one is sort of we're thinking it may go in the future where it's, a lot less for exported, but you're still for your site consumption, you're still getting a good rate. The third one is if everyone managed to piss off the PUC so bad that they decide to take it out on us and cut not just the energy you're getting, the money you're getting for overgeneration, but they actually cut the rate you're getting for site consumption as well. And that worst case, we're not expecting it